This session is energy, the environment, and the economy, which really is a very broad subject and allows our speakers to pretty well talk on anything they wish. But we want to just especially thank three premiers for being willing to be here together and to speak on this subject. Premier Clark from British Columbia, and Premier Puslowski from the Yukon, and Premier Prentice from Alberta. So let's give them a very warm welcome for making the time to see us. Now, I'm going to introduce them one by one. Of course, they don't need much introduction, and then they're going to give an address, and then we'll have a brief chat here, and then we'll go through 1, 2, 3, and by the time they're finished, you're going to have a pretty good grasp of what they want to say on these issues. I don't have to spend much time on their bios, but just for some of you that don't know them as well, Christy Clark is, of course, from British Columbia. She's the 35th Premier of that province. She was born and raised in Burnaby. She was elected in 1996. She served as Minister of Education and Minister of Child and Family Development. She returned to private life, and as premiers often do in British Columbia, she was on a talk show. Well, she had her own talk show and on CKNW, and then she decided to return to politics in 2010. She pulled off this huge upset in the 2013 BC election and earned a majority government. She's won the YMCA Woman with Distinction Award in 2009, and she's the one that brought the Pink Shirt campaign to BC to raise awareness on bullying. Now, Premier Clark spoke to us several years ago, and as I mentioned, since then she has vanquished the NDP in her province, which I think deserves. And she's demonstrated real leadership on the fiscal front, on the social front, on the energy front, and on the environmental front. So, Premier Clark, welcome back, and thank you for making the time, and we look forward, as always, to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, Preston. It's a great pleasure. Preston was a tremendous help for us in making sure that we did vanquish the NDP before 2013 and helping us get there. So I want to say again, thank you for supporting us through the years. It's cold here in Ottawa, eh? It's so cold here today that I was walking down along the canal and I saw a New Democrat with his hands in his own pockets. So thank you very much, Preston, and of course Jim Prentice and Daryl Puslowski, two great partners in Western Canada. It's all great to be with you here again. I don't make it out to Toronto and Ottawa and Ontario very much. I was actually reflecting this last year. I was in Asia more times than I was in Ontario, because that's really where we look for our economic health. And we've now balanced 3 budgets we have in a row. We have an almost $1 billion surplus this year. And that came after a lot of work in digging out our economy. I became Premier in 2011 and realized it was the second time that I was going to have to dig out our government from a big fiscal problem. Because when I joined the government in 2001 as a cabinet minister, we were following on 10 years of NDP governments. We had a $4 billion structural deficit, and we knew that they had kind of a couple of basic principles they operate on, as they do in British Columbia and the rest of the country. You never spend your own money when you can just go and spend somebody else's money. You never pass a debt on to your kids when you can pass it on to your grandkids. And we took a very different view of that. We decided that, and I believe very firmly in this, that the best principle for government is recognizing that if you want to succeed, you have to support and enable a thriving private sector, because it is a thriving private sector that is the source of all wealth in any society. It's a thriving private sector that is the source of all of the social programs which tie us together in our country, and the things that we think of as making us so uniquely Canadian. And the third thing is, I very firmly believe that we must do something better about public debt in this country. Because here we are spending money like no tomorrow all across the country, and we have been for years, and our children are going to pay the price for that. We have an obligation as a generation to make sure that we do everything we can to leave our children better off, or at least as well off as we are. And the only way we'll do that is by refusing to slough off these hard decisions, making them instead of making the decisions ourselves, instead of passing them on to our kids. And my experience in this has been that it hasn't certainly been easy, but I do think that it's the right thing to do. And in our province, when we ended up with a close to $1 billion surplus this year, we took 100% of that and we put it straight toward the debt. And as I often said, our children now are $1 billion better off than they otherwise would have been if we hadn't done that. And I think that's the direction that governments need to take once we've balanced our budgets. Since I've been here, and I've had a lot of, because we've done this third balanced budget, and we may be one of the only provinces that's able to balance in very difficult times in Canada at the moment. People are asking me, so what is the BC recipe? And I would say that there are 3 things that we've done. The first one is controlling spending, and that is the single most important thing that you can do. You have to keep government small. And the only way to keep government small, ultimately, is to make sure that you're managing your public sector increases and those costs of government, which are driven by your public sector collective agreements. And in our province, we've been lucky in the last few years, a public service that has been very willing to help us make sure we balance. We've done some things with them. For example, we've gotten them 5.5% over 5 years. We've got 2/3 of the public service locked down, and including a 0 in the first year. But built into that contract is an incentive for economic growth, where we've said to them, look, if our economy grows at a rate faster than predicted, you and your union members will get a piece of that. Because we can never forget that people who work in the public sector are the people that help enable economic growth. They're the ones that give out the permits. They're the ones that do the environmental assessments. They are the ones that are every day making those decisions that govern whether or not private sector economic development is going to be able to proceed. So why not give them a stake in that so that they can do better when the economy does better? The second part of the recipe is this: you've got to invest in diversifying your economy. And in BC, we've had a BC jobs plan we've been working from since 2011. We identified 8 sectors of the economy where we knew that there would be promising export growth, and we have focused on trying to invest in supporting all of those sectors. And the last one, of course, is making sure that you're diversifying the markets to whom you sell. We are long past the days where we can count on just one customer in the United States to buy all of our goods and services. And so in British Columbia, where we've worked hard to open those markets in Asia, 40% of our exports now go overseas. And 50%, or just a little bit above 50%, go to the United States. We are less dependent on trade with the Americans than any other province in Canada. Not because America is not our best friend, but because we know that in order to get the best price, you need competition, and you need more than one customer. And those are the 3 things on which we have premised our success in British Columbia. It's been slow, and it's, as one reporter from the Globe and Mail said to me the other day, you know, we just never notice you guys out in British Columbia. Well, the reason is because we're sticking to our knitting and trying to make sure that we are doing everything we can to grow our own economy. Now, I want to just speak for a second about resource development, because of course that's the theme of this. And British Columbia is nothing if not a resource-dependent province. But in our province, we always have to make sure that we do it right. British Columbians support resource development that is done responsibly and right. British Columbians recognize that jobs come from a thriving private sector, and that private sector is principally underpinned by a resource sector in our province. But it has to be done right. And First Nations have to be involved in helping us make those decisions as well. And those were some of the principles behind the 5 conditions that we set out when it came to moving heavy oil from Alberta. And those conditions were the subject of a lot of criticism when we first started talking about them. But we took them to the Republic of British Columbia as a free enterprise government, and we won the election in 2013 with an increased majority. Because unlike the NDP, we didn't say, we're putting a red light on pipelines. We said we'll put a yellow light. We said there are 5 conditions, and if you can meet them, those projects can go ahead. Clear, consistent, publicly understandable conditions that business can understand. Because we are in favor of any project that creates economic growth and finds the balance for protecting our environment. And I want to thank Premier Prentice because his government has embraced the 5 conditions, understand the conditions in British Columbia that it takes to make sure that we get resource development to happen. And it's been an emerging and very fruitful partnership with the new government in Alberta, and we are delighted, Jim, that you are there. Thank you. But we could talk about oil, and we should, because it's important for Canada, and I know that Premier Prentice will be talking about that. But we should also talk about LNG. We have a 150-year resource in natural gas of the cleanest fossil fuel on the planet. We are fronting huge economies in Asia that are hungry to be able to change their energy mix. And so as long as I'm offering out thank yous, I want to thank the federal government. Prime Minister Harper was out in British Columbia a couple of weeks ago improving the capital cost allowance, which improves the economics for liquefied natural gas in our province, understanding how important that is, not just to BC, but to the Canadian economy. Add that to the environmental legislation that we've brought in that will make our LNG the cleanest in the world. Add that to the most competitive tax regime, we would argue, in the world for LNG as well. And what have you got? You've got 19 big companies in the hunt for LNG projects. Petronas is going to, we think, they say, make their final investment decision on a $36 billion project in June of this year. Shell is on target for their final investment at the end of 2016. And Exxon is beginning to move very, very quickly, along with the other 16 proponents that are in the hunt. Since I became Premier 4 years ago, we've also seen huge increases in the mining business. 5 new mines open, 7 new expansions of mines, 1,300 new jobs, a doubling of the number of people who work in mining since 2001. And in lumber, we've seen our lumber exports go up to China by 3,800%. And that is the product of a diverse economy. It's a product of focusing purposefully on all those areas of economic growth where we're going to be able to create jobs. It's the product of working with First Nations. In 4 years, we've signed 250 treaty and non-treaty agreements, including benefit and revenue sharing agreements with First Nations. And as I always say to First Nations leaders around the province, we have done a fantastic job in BC of extracting natural resources. We have done a terrible job of sharing the benefits of those resources with the people from whose traditional territory they are extracted. And we are absolutely committed to making sure that we change that so that First Nations people and leadership are full partners in economic growth in our country. So last, let me just close with this because Premier Pawlowski is here, and the North, and I know he'll speak about this, is going to play a tremendous part in building Canada's future. And of course, Alberta, represented by Premier Prentice today, has always made an outsized contribution to Confederation, a contribution that we have always counted on, and I would argue Canadians have many times underappreciated. But we need a strong West. We need a strong West, and we've got one. But we need a strong Ontario, we need a strong Quebec, and we need a strong Atlantic Canada. Because even though the economic heartbeat of this country is moving to the West, Canada, central Canada, will always be vital to our national economic health. And it is the provinces that drive economic growth in this country and in all countries around the world. Canada's strength has never come from a big, interventionist, fiddling federal government. Canada's strength has come when provinces are able to innovate and invest and create economic growth from the ground up. This Confederation is powered by provincial governments. That is how it has always been, and it's how it always will be. But we do need to work together. We are at a unique moment in Canada's history. We are an energy powerhouse here. We have one of the most highly educated populations in the world. We have stable government, subject to the rule of law. But we have these opportunities, and we have to grasp them. Because unless we find the courage to grasp them, they'll disappear. And that means working together, being fiscally responsible, opening up diverse markets, investing in a diverse economy. That is the recipe I believe will work for Canada in the long term. Because I believe that this can be Canada's moment. This can be the generation that changes the future of Canada and finds us a new place in the world forever. But we have to have the courage to seize those opportunities. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much. That was great. Well, thank you very much, Premier Clark, and thank you for your leadership in British Columbia. We don't have a lot of time, and I know you have to move on, but just maybe a couple of questions. One is that you do live in one of the most environmentally beautiful parts of the world, and of course a province that's very well endowed with the natural resources. And so the name of the game, as you've alluded to, is how do you balance economic development with environmental conservation? And how do you convince the public that are skeptical on that that's what you're doing? Could you share your experience in trying to get that balance and communicating it?
I think, first, people need to understand that you want to get to yes. Because, I mean, as I say to all of our ministers, we are not about getting to know. The NDP are about getting to know. We are about getting to yes. That's what makes us different. We are interested in creating growth and jobs, and you can only do that if you get to yes on economic development. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think citizens need to know that government is going to be a strong and responsible regulator. So yes, we want to get there, but we are going to make sure that it happens right. So you need to set up clear and consistent principles for making sure that these things happen. And you need to work with communities and First Nations in helping them understand what's happening on the ground for them, helping them understand what those benefits are. And, you know, I think there's this view that some people don't want economic development. And that's true, there are some of those people. But they're a tiny minority of people. Most people want the jobs, they want the growth. They want a future for their kids. They just want it to be done right. And so I think clear rules, well communicated, I think it goes a long way.
Okay. Now, a number of years ago, your province and Alberta, and I think more recently Saskatchewan, entered into an agreement to reduce barriers to trade between the Western provinces. And of course, that's particularly important in this energy sector. So can you share with us like how Alberta and British Columbia are cooperating on the movement of oil sand, petroleum, and petroleum from the Western Sedimentary Basin to seaboard? What's the cooperation that is occurring there? Because I think we see a lot in the media about there's some conflict, but can you share with us how those provinces are cooperating to achieve that end?
Yes, well, can I start with this? Alberta has never had a premier that understands British Columbia better than Jim Prentice. Okay. And we're lucky about that because
he wants to retire to Vancouver Island.
All right.
Go ahead.
We're happy to have him. I hear he's a good golfer. Terrible ski season this year, though, Jim. Sorry. But if people you're in your own province, people often think, well, gee, every other province is just like mine. Yeah. And you try and go do business and you find out, oh my goodness, it's a little bit different than we expected. Jim has done so much work with First Nations on the environmental issues in British Columbia over the years. He understands it. And I really think that's going to make a tremendous difference because when British Columbia and Alberta are the closest friends in Canada. We have the most porous border between us. And people are even sneaking BC wine into Alberta in their trunks of their cars every once in a while, I understand. So important that we get along. It's really important for Canada that we get along. So that relationship is the basis of that, I think. And, you know, recognizing that governments have a really pivotal role to play in supporting resource development. With liquefied natural gas, I chair a committee of cabinet where we are talking about liquefied natural gas every 2 weeks. And I'm working with First Nations groups and communities personally helping bring negotiations forward. The Alberta government is now led by someone who wants to do that for heavy oil and make sure that that the Alberta government is really a part of the solution. That's essential to the cooperation.
Okay. Now, one last question, and I think I gave you a forewarning on this. In the Parliament of Canada, suppose instead of having a speech from the throne once a year, they invited a speech from a province. And the leader of that province got to say to the Parliament of Canada whatever the major concerns were of their province or the major aspirations and what the Government of Canada could do to help. If you were invited this year to give the speech from the province, from British Columbia in the Parliament of Canada, what would you emphasize?
I think the best way to make a pitch is to offer the person you're asking something that's good for them. And the most important thing that the federal government could do for Canada that is good for the federal government is to invest in economic infrastructure. It's to invest in roads, the Pacific Gateway out through the west. It's to railway sidings, clear up the bottlenecks, improve the ports, all of that infrastructure. The federal government made a big investment in the Pacific Gateway, billions of dollars, quite a while ago now. I don't think it's any accident that Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia are so successful economically now. It's partly because of that investment that the government made all those years ago in infrastructure. There's a huge return on it. And so if I was going to speak to the federal government at their throne speech, I would say, if you want to grow the economy, if you want to create jobs, if you care about growth and resource development, invest in infrastructure, because that will be your biggest return, and it will be the biggest return for Canadians.
Okay, okay. Well, thank you very much, Christy Clark.
Thank you very much, President. Appreciate it.